Welcome back to part 2 of my Empire Development Tree tier list. If you joined us last time, then you'll know exactly where we're up to. If not, I suggest you check out that video for how I'm rating things and how we got to this place. Taking a look quickly at how we got to this place, I see we didn't end up with anything in D tier. And you know, part of me doesn't like that because there's a rank that just hasn't been used. But also I feel that that's kind of justified. Most of these abilities actually do have a good purpose. Even the ones that are a little bit more specialized and may require certain builds tend to be quite powerful. Let's move through and see if we get any more ranked at D tier and carry on where we left off. And here it is, down the Astral Affinity tree at 250 Imperium, and of course we need some specialization now. It's requiring 160 points for it to tick along and unlock Surge Spellcasting. Casting a combat spell reduces the cost of all of your other combat spell types by 25% for 2 turns. 2 turns, interesting. Of course, we'll be casting combat spells frequently, so we'll be able to, we'll be getting this every turn, right? Let's be real. We're getting it every turn, minus 25% cost on future combat spells. This will let us cast potentially more powerful spells. You know, we may not have to choose between some of our weaker ones. We can just really roll out a lot of power. And I think for that reason, there are strong internal synergies with Surge Spellcasting here in the class. You're welcome to correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, because I'm 100% sure that you will. I think that Surge Spellcasting, in some ways, can be kind of a win more perk. Yes, it can help me out in a pinch, of course. If I'm a bit behind, I'm flailing in a fight, I can get out a more powerful spell. But a lot of the time I find that that 25% difference isn't actually quite enough to significantly change my strategy. I probably was already able to cast the spell or not. The benefits are good, they are strong, the synergies are there, although perhaps not quite as much as others. I'm going to place this one at a high B tier. I think that an A ranking could also be justified, but it will depend a little bit on your build. On the left-hand side of the wonderful Age of Wonders database representation of the tree is Rite of the Astral Summons, a one-off ability. Immediately summon an army of magic origin, so kind of like the one we looked at in Chaos last time, but of course magical units with low maintenance, that's a difference, at our throne city. Doesn't specify specifically the types of units that we'll be getting. In my experience, they're okay, not as strong as I had hoped, but better than some of the other summoning abilities like the one in Chaos. The fact that they have low maintenance is also very useful, because maintenance is going to be a big problem for Astral Empires in particular, I've found. Of course, others will struggle with their gold upkeep, but that mana upkeep can be particularly brutal. Summoning in an army in a pinch is also a really nice benefit. Effectively, we're trading 250 Imperium for 6 magical origin units with low maintenance to appear, and they'll all appear in our throne city, so they won't be split up across the Empire. I think that 250 Imperium is a great trade-off for 6 units with low maintenance. Of course, it won't be useful in every build, maybe slightly more useful in a pinch than normally. You may already have your armies trained, you might not need it, but I think that the cost is very low in comparison to the benefit. And that low maintenance will save you money throughout the game as well. I think this is a solid contender for an A tier ability. Moving down the list, costing 50 more Imperium from the previous entry, we have Ingredient Experimentation. Your throne city gains plus 15 knowledge for each magical material your empire has access to. Magical materials, of course, often spawn in and around free cities, so it can be quite easy to trade for them or grab them through vassalization or conquest. They'll also just appear around the map in higher value locations. It's quite easy to found an outpost on them, and I would note here, thankfully, it's empire access, not city access. So it's not just ones that are within the throne city, but ones that we have access to more broadly, whether that's through trade, conquest, establishing cities. There are, of course, 9 in total, which brings our total knowledge up nicely. Even if, let's say, we have access to half of them. Let's say we have 5. That's an additional 75 knowledge per turn on Empire. That's really strong. Really, really strong. Even at the lower end, if you only were able to get access to 3, which I think, frankly, you can do a bit better than that, you're still getting around 45 knowledge per turn. This is a very good ability, absolutely. I do weight knowledge slightly higher than some of the other resources, putting it closer on par with Imperium than the likes of, say, gold. But even if it was gold, I mean, you could put almost any resource here and it would be great. I think this is very powerful. Ingredient experimentation for me deserves its spot rightfully and unfortunately slightly ugly because now it's making this group twice the size of the others, but that's just something you'll have to deal with. I'm sorry. I think it deserves an S tier. A great way to gain a whole load of extra knowledge on top of resources that are already the best in the game in terms of yield, right? They beat the average resource node by far usually. They have lots of synergetic effects between themselves. I think it's a nice one. S tier. Next, we have focused studies for 350 Imperium, and of course more focused. We get research posts granting us an extra 5 knowledge, and conduits granting us an extra 5 mana. These are improvements that you're unlikely to build toward the start of the game, I think, because they don't provide a lot of boosts. But as you start moving through, you do need at least some of them to be able to build some of the more advanced buildings, like the research buildings, for example. So to say that you won't have any is ridiculous. Of course you will. But they may not be as numerous as your farms, your quarries, your forests early on. In fact, they probably shouldn't be. Some of the special improvements count as research posts or conduits as well. Potentially, your ancient wonder tiles too. You're probably building this kind of thing on them. Maybe. So there's certainly potential to gain knowledge and gain mana out of this. Potentially upwards towards something like 40 or 50, which makes it a very powerful effect. It is, of course, more expensive than the one that we were looking at before, requires more specialization, and I would argue it doesn't quite provide the same benefit. Mana being worth slightly less than knowledge, in my opinion, is a slight downgrade, and having to have those specific tile improvements also somewhat weakens it. However, I think that its strong synergies, the fact that it provides likely quite a bit of knowledge still, potentially 30, 40, and some mana, gives this a really strong base and an incredibly synergetic one at that. I tossed and turned on this one a lot, whether it's worth an S tier or an A tier, and I'm very much still on the fence about it, more so than most of the other things we've discussed throughout. For me, I think it is just worthy of an S tier, thanks to that powerful synergy, extra mana to cover our upkeep, knowledge to cover our spells. I think it's worthy. Let me know what you think below. I think this one could also warrant a different review. And to its left, for the same cost, but of course as a one-off, we immediately conjure a defended magic material near each city in our empire. There we go, everybody. Obviously, the synergies here are real, and the synergy, of course, aligns very well with ingredient experimentation, where our magical materials provide us with more knowledge. It is a one-off, but it's a one-off that provides a huge amount of yield moving forward. Yes, it's a defended magic material. I don't consider that to be a very big deal at all near each city in the Empire, so we don't have full control over where they'll be, but you can probably guarantee you're going to pick these things up. Magical materials, better than resource nodes, as I've discussed. I think this is a nice one-off ability. I place the right of conjuration up here at the S tier. I think 350 Imperium is a small price to pay for likely access to, let's say you've got 4 cities, that's 4 magic materials, 4 of their benefits, and all of that massive internal synergy we've just discussed. Up at the high end, 400 Imperium, we have Teleportation Mastery. This is a juicy one. Armies are restored to full hit points and regain 50% of their movement points after using a teleporter. So your teleporters now give you a full heal, and you can move 50% further. Furthermore, the tile improvement itself will grant you 15 mana base income. A really nice amount of base income, right? Usually we might see something like +5, and now we get +15. This makes your teleporters instant healers, 50% extra movement, so not only will you traverse the map with them very easily, but then once you do, you'll be in a better spot, and you get extra mana for your unit upkeep or your spells or whatever. You do, of course, need to have teleporters to get any kind of use out of this, but being able to move around the map quicker than your opponent, especially teleportation, is incredibly strong in Age of Wonders 4. Combine that even just with the free heal alone, and I think this is worthy of an S tier ranking. And finally, we have Astral Binding. New magical origin units, so obviously it doesn't apply to anything we already have, gain +3 rank. +3 rank is huge. Usually we'd only see +1. So in terms of the uniqueness of this ability, it's off the charts. Of course, it requires us to train new units, new magical origin units at that. So there is a slight drawback. Though I would argue whether you're going for a magical victory or a domination or an expansion, you're going to need units. You're going to need new units. And this is a fantastic way to outpace the opponent. I think Astral Binding is an A tier pick. The 3 ranks are really good, undeniably very strong. However, we do unlock this quite late in the piece, and there may or may not already be existing armies that have these ranks, right? Because we haven't just started the game. We should have armies that have quite a bit of experience. We should have leaders that provide their armies with experience. And for that reason, and its high cost, I rank it at an A tier. Moving on to the Materium affinity tree, we have military engineering. The first one we'll get, of course, fairly easy if you've got 1 or 2 things in the class. This one gives us minus 50% gold cost to place outposts. Quite useful, of course. We're doing that quite a lot from the start. And they'll take 1 less turn to build. They'll also start with the wall structure. The wall structure, in my opinion, is potentially the least useful of the 3. Of course, it will help you with your defenses, but it won't provide you with, say, the extra range or the extra territory that the other upgrades will get. The 50% saving of gold is nice, and taking 1 less turn to build will help you get things online just that little bit faster, right? Maybe it's an ancient wonder that you're trying to get online, getting it online 1 turn faster, you get an extra 20 knowledge and 5 Imperium because you've connected it a turn sooner, in theory. I think military engineering is a nice pickup because of how cheap it is, but its impact overall is perhaps not as powerful as some of the others at this level. I think that over time, military engineering could save me about $600 if I was building walls. I personally don't tend to on my outposts, so perhaps the personal saving is a little bit less. Getting them online faster is nice. I'm going to rank it at an A tier. It's very cheap and it's a good ability. I don't think it's quite good enough to rank S tier though. Consolidated Industry is up next. It provides us +1 city stability on our province improvements if they're adjacent to one of the same type. So if you have a forest next to a forest, you'll get +2 city stability because each one of them will give you 1 additional stability. This is an interesting one. I'm not sure it provides a huge amount of value. You will, of course, have some adjacencies. Forests are likely to be near forests, and you may be building foresters on them, for example. But to think that you would plan adjacencies around this could be a bit difficult because of the constraints around tiles. Right? I can't necessarily build farms everywhere. I need a certain type of terrain to be able to do so. I also think that +1 stability isn't massive, and the requirement of adjacency makes it even harder to get. For me, I don't rank Consolidated Industry very highly, despite its very cheap cost and the fact that we can get it online very early. I think if you're struggling, it's a nice way to pick up a little bit of stability, but it's probably not a priority, early especially. I give Consolidated Industry a slightly below average C tier. Don't get me wrong, city stability, of course it's useful. I just don't think there's quite enough yield here to really push you toward this unless you're in a desperate situation. Next, we have Metropolitan Society, cities that share a border with the Throne City, which likely a lot of your cities will, or should, gain +10% in all types of their income. There are a couple of bordering synergies that exist. Order has one as well. I think that it's not difficult to get your cities to share that adjacency. If you're working towards magic or expansion victories in particular, you'll almost certainly want to have at least 3 cities that are sharing a border, 2 of them with the Throne City, and they'll receive 10% in all of their income. I think this is really powerful. I think the caveat of having to share a border is just slightly unfortunate, but like I say, not that difficult to work around, and in most strategies, you'll end up with that anyway. 10% of all types of income is very strong. Metropolitan Society, for me, therefore, ranks at an A tier. It just has a great ability, 10% extra income for those cities across all of their resources. I think you should at least be able to pick this ability up on 2 cities, and it shouldn't take too long to get that in place. It's an S tier for me. Next, we have War Smithing, where mines grant 10 draft. Couple of things to note about mines. Firstly, there is synergy, of course, within class for mines. There are plenty of unique mines that you can build, those special improvements, and a couple of them are pretty good around like the golems and stuff, for example. So I think that you will inevitably end up with mines. However, mines aren't needed at the start of the game, right? You don't need to build a mine on gold to get the gold out of it. You can build a farm or a quarry or a forester even. And those are the three that you should be focusing on to get boosted buildings. I therefore rank the value of mines to be lower than the value of those other improvements. This does a good service for them though. It helps to lift them up quite a bit by granting you an additional 10 draft. Is draft the most useful resource ever? Potentially not. Would I rather it was 10 knowledge? Absolutely. But it's still very useful to training units. In the early game, 10 draft is quite a bit. As you move through, of course, it's unlikely to be, but you will be able to scale it up across many mines. Warsmithing for me is a C tier pick. I think it ranks right around that sort of just passing grade, mainly because, as I say, mines are not overly incentivized. While there will be some internal synergy for them down the line, you're unlikely to have many of them at the start of the game, unless you're desperate for gold. 10 draft is great. If it was another resource, I would have ranked it a little higher, and for that reason, I'm going to place it at a C tier, though I think that an argument could be made for a solid B tier as well. On the left-hand side, we have Right of the Armorer, which grants us Breastplate of the Champion hero item. It's, of course, a torso piece for our hero to wear. It's an all right chest piece. Yeah, it's pretty good, to be honest. It's a one-off for 150 Imperium, so around the cost of founding a new city, which would cost us 200. Or attracting a few populations for a few extra tiles. The thing that I don't like about Right of the Armorer is that Breastplate of the Champion is not a overwhelmingly fantastic item. It's a good item, it's not a great item. The thing that I dislike, though, isn't actually anything to do with the breastplate at all. You could throw a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 breastplate at me, and it wouldn't matter too much about what it does. To me, it's that I just don't often get to use this. Often at this point in the game, maybe I've got 2 or maybe 3 heroes. I find that I already have chest plates or robes because I might not even be interested in chest plates for all of my heroes. I also find that the benefits from the ones that I've got from infestations that I've been clearing, from ancient wonders that I've been clearing, which also clearing those wonders, by the way, synergizes quite well with Materium and a Materium build. And I find that this one just doesn't excite me. It's a one-off for a fairly average item that I often don't have space for. Is it a bad pick? No, of course not. If you need a breastplate, if you need a torso item, this is a nice, easy way to get one. Do you need one, though? And that is that's the real sticking point here. I'm worried that this will be a little bit of a controversial pick, that this is one where my personal bias has seeped in a little bit too strongly. Of course, everyone's going to reflect their biases in their reviews from these things because there is always a certain element of opinion and experience involved. If you didn't have any opinion or experience, for example, you'd probably struggle to make a list like this. But for me, it's a D tier. I don't think that the breastplate is good enough, and I don't think that it's actually going to be useful to you in this moment. I think the opportunity cost of 150 Imperium is too great for an item that actually you just might not even be able to put on. For me, it's a D tier. Next, we have Specialist Districts. Those special province improvements outside of the normal conduit, farm, forester, etc. provide us with an additional 5 gold. I think you're likely to build more of these improvements in a Materium build than you are in others, so some small points for the internal synergies. However, I think a lot of the special improvements are kind of just scams. Like, yes, there are benefits to them. They'll provide you with some extra yield. You might be able to build them on terrain that you wouldn't be able to build a different kind of tile improvement on. I have found use from them there. And the internal synergies too. 5 gold, nice enough benefit, makes the special improvements even better. But does it just kind of bring them up to par, I wonder? I'm not entirely sure. Some of them are really good. Some of them are really not worth your time, and therefore this Specialist District ability won't be able to play out all that often. For me, this is a C tier pick. I almost put it in D tier as well, but I elevate it to C tier because of the internal synergies that are on offer. However, of course, that will largely depend on your build, right? I can't guarantee what other affinities you've got and what kind of empire you're building. I don't think that the special structures are particularly widespread or widely used, and +5 gold is on the lower end of what I would expect from this kind of yield. It's a C tier for me. Next, for 250 Imperium, we have Master Masons. City structures cost 20% less gold to build. That's it. Pretty straightforward. Every time you queue something up in your build queue, it'll cost you 20% less gold. This is a really nice saving. It stacks over time. You're going to generate a lot of money from this. I would argue a lot more money than your +5 gold from special province improvements, which frankly could have almost been ranked at a D tier if it weren't for those synergies around golems and mines and sort of building up a slightly different empire inside of this build. Master Masons, though, is much more universally applied. There's no need to specialize into almost anything, really, to get value out of this, and you should get quite a bit. Late game buildings can be very expensive, hundreds and hundreds of gold, and that's exactly how much you'll save over the course of a game thanks to Master Masons, potentially thousands of gold saved here. Master Masons for me is either an S or an A tier ability, and I'm going to place it fairly confidently up at the S tier. Huge gold savings, 20% off everything that you're building inside of a very industrious empire, likely with many cities, lots of buildings to build, a wonderful pick. In many ways, almost as an alternative to that sort of longer generation of gold, saving on our purchases, we have Right of Wealth, which instead instantly gives us 2,000 gold at the cost of 250 Imperium. We've seen abilities like this before, of course. We saw the 1,000 mana ability, which basically mirrors this one. Interesting that gold is weighted to be half the price, effectively, if we compare it directly to that, right? We're getting 2,000 gold instead of 1,000 mana, thereabouts. Now, 2,000 gold is a lot of cash. The beauty of gold is that we can use it to hurry production. And so a splash of gold like this, yes, of course, you could use it to queue up a few different things, pay off your debts or what have you. But you can also use it not just to queue up buildings, but to insta-finish buildings or to insta-finish units, right? To hurry their production along. There are some also internal synergies for that. I think that Right of Wealth for 250 Imperium is actually a very good deal. 2,000 bucks can be used universally and very widely. Of course, it is only a one-time thing, so it's a one-and-done effect. But the ability that it could have on empire development or the size of your army is fairly profound. We're looking at around potentially 4 very good units out of this, maybe rushing 4 or 5 different city structures depending on where you've got them already. I think it's a nice one. As far as one-offs go, of course, you could use it to save your backside, get you out of a sticky situation, but you can also use it to really give the empire a push, a huge surge in development around certain buildings that you might need, very expensive ones to queue up, or your military. Gold, while it may be slightly less useful, in my opinion, than something like knowledge, is much more universal than knowledge. It can be used universally, even in comparison to mana, really. And for that reason, I think that this is actually almost an S tier ability in terms of its trade-off and its bang for its buck, but I'm going to rank it ultimately at an A tier. 2,000 gold is a huge lump sum of money, but it is a one-time thing, and it cannot be necessarily applied in every single way, but its universality is one of its saving graces. Next up, we have Siege Masters, and just like Siege Masters in the general tree, which is unlocked right down at 150 Imperium, we get, you guessed it, +1 extra siege slot. So now we can get up to 4, and you probably will, of course, if you're moving down this line. The other benefit here is that siege projects cost 25% less, so you're likely to save probably on gold, potentially also mana as well, when you're queuing up your siege projects. I really like Siege Masters. The extra slot is a huge benefit for bringing in extra token units, for example, extra siege equipment, or just harassing the defenders, reducing the time of the siege, making the enemy weaker. And now you can do all of that at a 25% discount as well. So you'll save a little bit of cash money as you go through. Siege Masters, for me, deserves an A tier, actually somewhat similarly, of course, to the initial one, but for slightly different reasons. It doesn't rank higher or lower because there are a few different trade-offs. It's more expensive, and of course, we're going to need to go down the Imperium line to get it. So there's a couple of things detracting from it, but then, of course, supporting it is that minus 25% discount, and the fact that we can now get up to 4 Siege slots. I think it's rightfully deserving of an A tier slot. If sieges were more common, if you had to siege an enemy in every game, because of course you don't, if you're going for magic, you might not need to at all. I might be likely to rank it in S tier, but I think it deserves a solid A. Next we have Indomitable Defenders. Your units gain 20 morale at the start of any combat where you are defending, and your cities no longer suffer economic penalties while you're under siege. This is obviously all about defense. The units gaining morale is useful. You'll be less likely to flee from the fight. You'll be more likely to strike critical hits for an extra 50% damage. Of course, it only applies when you're defending, the idea being that you're defending your cities, and of course you won't suffer the economic penalties of being under siege. This one is therefore only useful when you are defending. Have you failed if you're on the defensive and the enemy's made it up to your city borders, banging on the door, you are unable to take them down beforehand? Well, I wouldn't go as far as to say you've failed, but obviously you're already not in an ideal position. This is therefore a bit of a catch-up mechanic, right? You're not going to pick this up at all if you're dominating, if you're winning, if you're pushing the aggression, or even if you're just out fighting in open fields. But when it comes to defense, this is obviously a great trump card to play. The extra morale is very nice, plus 20. However, I would also note that there are many other ways to adjust morale. It may help reduce what the enemy's doing to you during or before the siege. That's nice. But as I say, plenty of spells, plenty of tomes of magic, and other ways to adjust that morale. A nice benefit, though. And I think that that's kind of what this provides, a nice benefit. The reduction of the economic penalty on your city while it's under siege is also, don't get me wrong, a nice benefit, but I just don't think this does enough. It can, of course, only be applied when you are under siege. And if you are under siege, I would argue that mistakes have been made up until this point that have got you there, and this trait may not help you fix those mistakes. 20 extra morale won't be enough, ultimately, to defend a city that is under a very powerful siege. This is likely to make a difference on the border, right, where things are really close. So therefore, my qualifiers to get value out of this are, firstly, I'm in a disadvantageous position, to say the very least, because my city is under siege. Secondly, I'm unable to lift that siege with my own units, so I therefore have also failed to train or keep an army. And then thirdly, once all of that is out of the way, the benefit that I'm getting is a little bit of extra morale, and I'll save a bit of money on my city that's under siege for a couple of turns. I think this is a D tier pick. Its cost is simply too high. If it was ranked lower in the tree, if it was something you unlocked quite early, I could see more of a case for choosing this. But I just, for all of those reasons I've laid out, don't think that this is a very good pick, and therefore I will be ranking it at the D tier. To its left, at quite a high price, and our final sort of one-off effect inside of this tree, is Rite of the Dreadnought. All currently active units that exist, permanently gain +1 defense and +1 resistance. Defense is great, resistance potentially slightly even better, but either way we're protecting ourselves from physical and magical damage. It's being applied across the board. +1 isn't a huge modifier, it's important to note. You've got plenty more opportunities early on to get +1 defense. You can get it from a tier 1 Materium tome, for example. So that effect is maybe not massive. And likewise, +1 resistance is probably valued around the same. It's the kind of thing that you might get out of a tier 1 or tier 2 spell unlock from a tome of magic. However, it is applied across the board, instantly, and permanently. The downside, of course, being that newly trained units don't get it. So potentially we're applying a +1 defense and +1 resistance to however many units we have at that point. Maybe we have 3 armies of 6 that we're fighting an enemy with. So we'll be getting 18 defense and resistance across them. I think that defense and resistance is nice. However, because this is a one-off, We don't get it on our future units. It is really dependent on what units we have on the battlefield right now and the kind of build that we have. If we have a very tokeny build where our units tend to perish quite a bit, then this isn't going to be very useful. If we have a build where we're training veterans and keeping them alive and healing them and just sort of relying on one core army, then sure, this is absolutely very useful. Right of the Dreadnought for me is a C tier pick, just because it only applies to our current units. It is therefore, as I've mentioned, very specific to the kind of build that you've got, the kind of armies that you're structuring, and one unfortunate loss or unfortunate fight completely gets rid of this fairly expensive development tree unlock. It's a C tier for me. The penultimate Materium unlock is Resourceful Vigor. Your units regenerate an additional 1 hit point per 2 move points they have remaining at the end of their turn. That's really nice because it doesn't specify where our units have to be. They don't have to be in friendly or enemy territory. All they have to do is basically not move as much. Of course, there are other ways to save movement points if you have race transformations that might favor a certain type of terrain, like forest skin, walking through forest. But this is nice because it's universally applied. 1 hit point isn't huge, but you'll have a lot of movement points. You know, you could restore 30 health a turn, or well, you can restore a decent amount of health per turn, regardless of where you are on the map. And I think that is what separates this apart from a lot of other things. Of course, if you're within friendly territory, then you'll heal extra fast. Useful potentially if you're rushing or standing around waiting to defend a city that is under siege or under attack, and of course, a load of other things. I think this is a really nice ability, granted at quite a high cost. It's really just the ability to heal in friendly territory that brings this one up for me. If you're out pillaging, standing on a tile, burning it down, you're going to heal a heck of a lot more. Or if you're simply out exploring the world, you don't even have to be fighting to get benefit out of this. Maybe you took a few hits from clearing an infestation. You can just set up camp for a turn or two and you'll be fine. For me, it's a solid A tier pick. Healing around the map, great. And last but not least, Martial Ancestry. Unit upkeep is reduced by 10% per rank that it has. Okay. There's potential here, of course, to save huge money. It will synergize slightly with that idea of having one army, keeping them alive, ranking them up, you know, that one-off ability of adding defense to them. So there are some small internal synergies, though not as large potentially as some of the other affinities. 10% per rank, obviously that's self-explanatory. 2 ranks, it's 20%. 3 ranks, it's 30% plus plus. The ability to save cash money is pretty profound here. You are potentially saving 100 gold per turn out of Martial Ancestry. A very good pickup. Of course, it relies on you having that small caveat of keeping your units alive, keeping your well-trained soldiers alive. And if you do, you stand to benefit a great deal of money. However, one unfortunate loss, and Martial Ancestry turns from a powerful effect to one that you won't really be able to utilize that much. It's for that reason that I'm placing it at a B tier. That, and of course the fact that you need to specialize hard to unlock this, and then you need to pay quite a high price to get it. Over on the order tree, we have Pacification, or Pacification, if you don't live in the Pacific. Destroying an infestation or conquering a free city grants a stacking plus 300 relation bonus to all free cities for 10 turns. You should be able to clear some infestations. Absolutely. You might also end up conquering a free city that declares war with you at the start of the game for no reason. 300 relations is a huge benefit to free city relations. Inside of the order build, we may, of course, be more likely to lean down that route. So there are some strong internal synergies that will play out throughout the tree. In the beginning, though, of course, we don't have any of those. So at its face value at the start, you're going to build up very good relations with the free cities around you, and that will benefit you a lot as you move forward. Pacification doesn't actually add any yield to the empire to begin with, though. Of course, building up their relationship, you know, you get them as a vassal, you're starting to earn big bucks from them. But if you don't have an infestation near you, you might not have the qualifying factors to game it as much as you would like. But I think it's still very good and very cheap and worthy of a low A tier ranking. Next up, diplomatic channels. Another way for us to get an additional Whispering Stone. This time, though, it only costs 75 Imperium, of course, at the requirement that we have some points ticking away into order. That makes it slightly cheaper, actually, than the diplomatic focus under the general tree, which requires 120. Although, of course, the general one can be unlocked with any affinity, whereas here we need 20 points ticking away into order. As I have done throughout the tier list, I'm assuming that you're working through the tree that I'm reviewing in at least some length. You plan on picking up quite a few things. Maybe you've got a few times of magic here too. +1 Whispering Stone early on, very strong synergies as well inside of the class. It's a cheap, dirty, and effective way to get a Whispering Stone, and it absolutely deserves the S tier. Obviously, there aren't really any other ways to get Whispering Stones outside of this development tree. This is your primary way that you'll be generating them, and I think that alone is worthy of a high ranking. Then you consider the internal synergies and how early you can get this. Solid S tier for me. Next, we have tribute trees. Vassals grant +10 gold in tribute. Pretty straightforward. If you've got someone up to vassalage, which you may or may not at this point, but you will likely moving through, they're going to give you an extra 10 bucks. It's nice. It is. Absolutely. It's good. Maybe you get an extra 10 bucks a turn. Maybe as you start to move through a bit later, you're getting 20, potentially 30. It's a good generator of money. Maybe akin to one of the middle tier improvements or buildings that generate cash. To put it into perspective, for 100 Imperium, it's a fairly low price. And it's lucky that it is, because if it was much more expensive, I would be significantly less of a fan. I think Tributaries deserves a B tier ranking. The generation of gold is useful. Like I say, you're probably able to get 10 or 20 early on. Fairly early anyway, depending on your spawn and whether you've got a lot of free cities around you or not. So there are some dependencies that have to play out. I think they're not that difficult to get to play out. And the benefit is fairly nice. Again, akin to building, say, a tier 2 or tier 3 gold building. Next, we have Career Soldiers, the Order Empire skill that allows shock units, shield units, and polearm units, nice to see 3 classes, gain their experience 20% faster. So, of course, they'll be able to rank up, become more powerful, more efficient, better troops faster. It applies to 3 unit categories, and likely unit categories that you'll be using quite a bit inside of the Order tree, perhaps more so than someone who is more inclined to deal with magical beings. And you'll get your experience 20% faster. That is a decent pickup. Some synergies with heroes and the likes. I think this is nice. Potentially a little underrated because it's not very flashy. It doesn't provide a big flash in the pan. Wow, look at what I do. Here's an ability for you now. But it does provide a stacking bonus over time. Given there's a strong internal synergy around sort of healing, faith, restoring, I give a slightly less penalty to some of the downsides on this one that I might have to similar perks in other classes. I think this is worthy of an A tier. The generation of experience is quite rare within the development tree as well. There are very few opportunities to do that, and it's applied to a unit group that we'll be using a lot. And generally speaking, we should be able to heal, keep our armies alive, keep our armies experienced inside of this affinity, perhaps slightly better than others, and of course, the total opposite to what you might want to try and do inside of Chaos, for example. I think it's an S tier. Exemplar is up next, leading into the Rally of Lieges mechanic. Units that are recruited through it gain +2 rank upon recruitment. There is, of course, a very good internal synergy with Rally of Lieges. You're going to want to buddy up with city-states. You're going to want to have allies, vassals. This builds on those and the units that you get from them, as well as, of course, clearing any ancient wonders or what have you. So there are other ways to feed into this, helping to reduce that pigeonhole effect. And they receive +2 rank upon recruitment. Super good. Super good. The Rally of Lieges units are already very strong. You already have ways to pick up, like tier 2, tier 3 units on like turn 10 or something daft. This will, of course, happen slightly later than that in the game. But the +2 rank upon recruiting units that we're going to be doing a lot, I think is a very powerful effect. I toss up between ranking Exemplar at S tier or A tier. It does rely on you using the Rally of Lieges, but the strong internal synergies mean that you're almost always going to be. And I think it's a really powerful effect with +2 rank on all of those units, which were already very strong. It's for that reason that I'm going to place this one at a low S tier. Next, we have Benevolent Conquerors. Vassals gain +1 allegiance level when they're first vassalized. So you'll get a higher tier of reward out of them, you'll get more contribution from them earlier on. Also, converting conquered cities into vassals takes 1 less turn. You'll also, of course, get to that a little bit faster thanks to the extra allegiance level. This one is a slightly difficult one to rank. It, of course, assumes that you want to convert cities to be able to get that benefit. And the benefit of converting them 1 turn faster, I would argue, is pretty insignificant, really. And then the other part of this is that vassals gain +1 allegiance level when you first meet them. This likely saves you, potentially 5 or 6 turns for when you can convert them, when you ultimately get to that top level. Maybe it saves you 5 turns from getting an extra 10% gold, etc. off them as well. I think that the net benefit here really is just that time saving for the allegiance level. I think that's carrying most of the weight of this perk. It ranks around the middle of the tree, and I'm not quite sure that it really delivers enough for this level. And I'm not sure it provides enough yield really either. Benevolent Conquerors, for me, sits around the B or C tiers. The extra allegiance level is great, works us towards that sort of supreme vassalization status a bit faster. It's for that reason that I will rank it at a B tier, but I would note it's a pretty low B tier. If it weren't for those very powerful internals, no, I've changed my mind. In my notes, I have B, and then in brackets, make it a C if when you're reading this, it sounds crappy. And unfortunately, I think it just did sound a little bit crappy. I'm going to place it at a C tier. To its left, we have the one-off 250 cost Imperium effect of Rite of Enduring Duty. All your units instantly regain hit points, and non-hero units gain +1 rank. Okay, interesting. So we have an instant heal for all of our units. Very strong, of course, because it will apply in enemy territory. It can apply while you're out on the campaign. And then all of our non-heroes, so they won't get their upgrades, but that's fine, gain +1 rank, which is also really nice applied. So it's an insta-heal across the board, and all of our units get +1 rank. Pretty powerful. As far as the one-off effects goes, pretty easy to utilize. Of course, it does require that you're low on health or want the extra rank. Most of the time, those two requirements won't be difficult to meet. The +1 rank is a really great ability. I think it helps to increase the power, but it's the ability to be able to heal your units wherever they are instantly upon the point of triggering this that surges it tactically for me up into the A tier rankings. Next, we have Justified Wars, one of the few ways to deal with the grievances mechanic inside of the Empire development tree. Here we gain +20 more grievances against players with an opposing alignment. So if you are the Order, the Restorer of Good, then you'll get +20 additional grievance against evil-aligned players. It's a nice way to generate justified wars. And of course, a justified war may even generate you Imperium, whereas one that isn't justified can potentially cost you a lot, right? Up to like an 80% reduction or what have you. It basically can shut you down entirely. So the generation of grievances is both rare within the tree and quite useful, I think, for achieving your goals inside of an Order build. You may or may not need to have generated them, though. If you're already playing that good build, then you'll already be generating some negative grievance against evil players, and likely they will have done things to generate even more against you. So it can't necessarily be universally applied, but the effect that it does apply is somewhat unique and fairly strong. I give Justified Wars a strong B ranking. I was very close to placing this one in A, but of course, it does slightly depend on your victory, the way that you're setting up your game and how you're choosing to play it, whether this will provide a great deal of benefit or not. Next, we have House Levies. Recruiting units during Rally of Lieges costs 50% less gold, and the time between the Rally of Lieges is reduced by 5 turns. This is, of course, the ultimate tree for the Rally of Liege mechanic. Picking up extra units from the collection of units available to your free cities ultimately, but also, of course, from Ancient Wonders and other sources. But this is insanely strong. The synergy is there overwhelmingly. Grabbing these often very powerful, of course, higher rank units, thanks to some things that we've almost certainly picked up in the order tree. At 50% less gold will save us a lot of money over the course of the game, particularly as these rallies are happening 5 turns faster. That's a huge number of turns. I honestly think that this could still be reasonable if that said 3 turns. So to get 5 is really great. Saving money, you're likely to save, I would say at least 100 gold each time, potentially hundreds. So we stand to save hundreds of gold, and more importantly, we can get these units online 5 turns faster. And of course, that'll just keep going exponentially as we keep getting more, better units, more expensive units, more frequently through the Rally of Lieges mechanic. I think that this one sits at the higher end of our tree. It has very strong internal synergies with order, but the beauty about these synergies is that they're not dependencies. You don't necessarily have to be going, full vassalization, taking every single perk you can. It's the only thing you do to get benefit out of this. However, it is somewhat expensive, and so it's likely that order is one of your primary focuses regardless. I think that this is a very strong effect, and I think it's actually worthy of an S tier. I'd initially contemplated placing it around A, but having the Rally of Lieges happen faster saves you a lot of gold if you don't want to speed it up manually. And recruiting those units, which are already very strong likely, you already have a lot of variety within them, for 50% less gold, I think rounds this out to be a really strong package and a core part of any build or strategy closely related to buddying up with free cities. Next, Master of Houses. Your vassals grant plus 10% more resources in tribute. Interesting. We've already seen some plus 10% effects play out. We've seen it play out in, for example, bordered cities, as we looked at a little earlier in Materium. Now we're receiving 10% more from all of our vassals in tribute. As you level them up, of course, you'll start to receive fairly decent yield. 10% isn't a massive multiplier, though. It's important to note. If a city is producing, let's say, 70 gold, that's 7 gold. 10 knowledge if they're particularly knowledgeable, producing 100 knowledge, though they're not likely to be quite getting that much. It is, of course, applied across all of your vassals, and I'm assuming that you'll have a few at this point. Potentially, let's say, 3. I think that the yield, therefore, is pretty decent, though the cost and the need to focus down this tree to get this is very high. I think the internal synergies, though, are incredibly strong. That extra yield will stack on to pretty significant buffs, and it is for that reason, despite the drawbacks, that I think, again, here we have a critical piece of infrastructure for a very solid build, and it's an S tier for me. Right down the bottom, we have probably the most unique one of all, Knightly Orders. Units of a legendary rank, the top rank, gain a buff depending on their type. And some examples you can see, fighter units gain Berserker, or Order of the Berserker. Shock arm units gain Order of the Thunderer. Shield units, Order of the Unbreakable. These buffs that focus in on what the unit does best and make it stronger. They are good buffs, very good. The downside, of course, being that your units must be at a legendary rank. The other issue being that you need to have stacked 500 points over time ticking into order, and you need to spend 500 Imperium to get it. However, there is, of course, as I've mentioned, synergies around keeping units alive, around ranking up your units, healing units, etc. inside of order. And so I think that here, of course, the legendary rank is easier to get than in a lot of other places. It is, however, quite a significant qualifier to get any kind of payoff out of Knightly Orders, and so it's important to factor that in, as well as its high cost. I'm placing Knightly Orders at a B tier purely because I haven't had enough time to test this one, full disclosure. Unlike a lot of the other things on this list, which are either more straightforward or I've played with a lot, this one I have not. Maybe a future live stream might be a good place to test it out. I think that the orders, looking them up, are very good buffs. The legendary qualifier is a little bit of a drawback, but again, not too difficult within this class to at least have a few. For me, though, I'm going to have to place it conservatively at a B tier ranking. And finally, it's the other class where we have a one-off right at the end of the tree, the branch of the tree. In this case, right of the banners leading into the Rally of Lieges mechanic event, where we can recruit units for 1 Rally of Lieges that we instantly call at no cost. Woof. Woof. No cost? Really? Sheesh, even the gold savings alone would be decent. We'll also gain 10 recruitment points, helping us get more out of the Rally of Lieges event. This is a very powerful one-off effect. I don't think I need to stipulate again the internal synergies that are on offer from Rally of Lieges. I'm really a big fan of this one, of the synergies it brings. A free Rally of Lieges. This is probably the greatest way to summon in an army out of any of the ways to summon in armies that you get out of side. As you may have noticed from each branch of the tree, basically, I think this one takes the cake. Even with its high cost, 500 Imperium, sure, but we're saving some down the line, and we're saving gold. We're getting a great Rally of Lieges event. I think Right the Banners is very good. With the assumption that you have worked your way through the order tree being pretty prominent here, of course, like it is in most of these discussions, I think that this one is worthy of an A tier ranking. It is just a one-off, and you will be able to train perhaps 1 full army of really powerful units, but then you're one and done. You've traded some Imperium in exchange for that. I think it's very good. If it was slightly easier to get, slightly lower in the tree, I would have ranked it S tier, but for me, it's an A tier. And now we move on to the last tree, the Shadow Affinity. What do we get? Well, for starters, Knowledge Extraction gains 50 knowledge per level of heroes defeated in combat. Couple of qualifiers here. Firstly, you have to defeat heroes. This, of course, can and will happen, but it's not guaranteed, right? Sometimes the heroes get away. Sometimes they're not out running around in the open where perhaps armies without heroes are. However, 50 knowledge is decent, and of course it's per level of heroes as well. So level 2, level 3, you're looking at 100, 150. So there's some ways for this to scale up. Ultimately, you're probably not going to get a huge amount of knowledge out of this, though. Let's be real. You'd need to carry it off 20 times, so take down heroes whose levels total 20, to get 1,000 knowledge out of it. That would be a great trade-off. If we consider it from a trade-off perspective, destroying 10 levels worth of heroes, absolutely doable. 500 knowledge for 50 Imperium. Okay, yeah. I'll take that deal. And we keep it for the rest of the game, of course, too, though its impact will start to wane as we start to be producing hundreds of knowledge every turn anyway. I'm ranking this one at a B tier, despite, of course, as I mentioned before, thinking that knowledge is a slightly more valuable yield than some of the other city yields. I don't think that this one actually provides all that much. It also places a pretty strong caveat that we have to be out fighting and we have to take down enemy heroes. We will do that, absolutely, through events or through conquest, but we may not do that a lot. Through into the later game, the 50 research is also pretty negligible, although they may be higher level. So that scalability is decent. For me, it's a B tier. I could also see a strong ranking or a strong suggestion that it's worthy of an A tier as well. It was right on the fence for me. Next, we have All Seeing. Free cities with a Whispering Stone assigned, granted, instantly provide us with vision range, so we can see all that they see. Free cities or vassals with a Whispering Stone also grant plus 10 knowledge. We're likely to have 1, maybe 2 Whispering Stones out. 20 knowledge, fairly early on, more reliable than having to go out and hunt down heroes to get it, absolutely. And you'll likely have your Whispering Stones applied for the rest of the game. So you can kind of think about this basically as plus 10/20 knowledge per turn for the rest of the game. Decent. The added benefit of having vision range on your free cities can be quite useful tactically as well, if you're trying to keep an eye out on enemies or infestations and that kind of thing. I think that All Seeing is a solid benefit. It provides the benefit of a few libraries for very low cost, basically, and I think that's pretty dang good. It's the low cost and the very low barrier to entry on this one, for me, that surges it up into the S tier. Knowledge, a very valuable resource. I think you can farm 20 knowledge per turn out of this fairly early on. Again, it's basically akin to building a few libraries instantly because your Whispering Stones are likely going to be used regardless. And for only 75 Imperium, those are some cheap libraries, if you know what I'm saying. S tier for me. For 100 Imperium, we have Shadow Binding, Magic Origin Unit Upkeep. is reduced by 20% of its cost. The scaling potential here is off the charts. 20% is great. You might be paying 200 mana on your upkeep. That would save you about 40 mana per turn. Again, if we were to compare it to the opportunity cost of buildings, then that is looking very juicy. Even if we compare it across the rest of the tree, I think you'll struggle to find mana savings of this extent at such a low cost. Of course, it does require that you have an army with significant upkeep to get value out of it. You may or may not always have that, but I think at a low barrier to entry, both in terms of affinity and Imperium cost, this is a great way to save on unit upkeep. The yield that you'll generate over time, for me, surge this one up into, at the very least, an A tier ranking. It does require, of course, that you have upkeep. You need to have upkeep to save upkeep. Is that worth an S tier? Is 40 mana per turn worth an S tier? Potentially even more, of course, and even more yield. I don't think it quite gets there. I think it's very good, maybe straddling this border, but for me, I'm going to rank it at an A tier. Next, we have Death Magic, where we gain 5 combat casting points per unit death or kill in combat. So when we perish, we get +5. When we destroy them, we get +5. We are likely, potentially, to have more token units, more cheap, discardable, undead units, potentially, than others. We should be able to farm this quite readily and generate a good amount of combat casting points, something that is quite rare and difficult. We don't have a lot of opportunities to generate them within the tree, and I think this is a great way to do it. 5 isn't huge, granted, and so, in a small fight, you're not getting much benefit out of this. But in larger fights, sieges, etc., there is a pretty significant benefit to be had out of Death Magic, and a rare way to get combat casting points. I think for those reasons alone, it's worthy of an A tier ranking. Difficult to get those combat casting points, and here's a very easy and reliable way within class and within the synergies to farm them quite readily. Next up at 200 Imperium, we have Stolen Power. Gain 200 mana and 200 knowledge upon completing conquest of a city. So we don't have to raise it like we had to with some of the previous ones, but we do have to defeat it. And when we do, we get a one-off benefit of 200 mana and 200 knowledge. How likely are you to complete conquest of a city is the first thing that I ask myself. Of course, it depends on my build and my victories. I'm likely to do it a few times through the game though, at least. Maybe up to 5, let's say, being a little generous, depending on the size of your map, of course. Let's say I complete it 5 times. That's granting me 1,000 knowledge and 1,000 mana for 200 Imperium. Not a bad trade-off. Not a bad trade-off at all. Of course, if I complete it fewer than that, though, it becomes quite low value. If I'm not playing an aggressive game, I'm not taking cities, I'll get almost nothing out of it. But at 5, even 3 cities, I think this is a reasonable deal. 600 mana, 200 Imperium, 600 mana plus 600 knowledge, though? Okay, yeah, now we're talking. The extra knowledge generated could be very strong, however it is build dependent. The mana is nice too. For me, I think this sits right on the border between A and B tier. I'm going to place it on B tier due to those dependencies that you just may or may not be able to make use of, not just depending on your strategy and how you play, but also how the game shapes up. The game may take a turn, and conquering cities just might not be a viable thing for you anymore. In that case, it provides no value. For that reason, I'm going to rank it in the middle of the row, a B tier. Next, we have Court of Whispers, where we'll gain 1 Whispering Stone. Of course, obvious synergies here. Earlier on, we know that the Whispering Stone will start to give us an extra 10 knowledge per turn as well. We also gain the ability to assign Whispering Stones to other Empire's vassals to gain their tribute. Now, this is really neat, because it's basically the only way outside of war that you can justifiably take a vassal, or at least the vassal's tribute in this case, from another empire. Once you've got a vassal, it's kind of hard to lose it. Someone has to really purposefully go and fight them and destroy them, basically. Or you have to treat them like total crap and completely disregard your relationship with them in order to lose them. This is a way to make up for that. Gain a Whispering Stone, deploy it at another empire, an enemy vassal, and get that sweet contribution. On top of that, we gain an extra Whispering Stone. I think Court of Whispers is a very powerful and also a very unique trait, unlike almost anything else in terms of what it delivers. The Whispering Stone, sure, we have a couple of other ways to pick those up, but placing them at vassals? That is good. Other people's vassals. I like that. Extra Whispering Stone alone, I think, provides great value, and the ability to deploy them more readily at high value targets that you might not otherwise be able to take is fantastic. As you can probably imagine, given we already have 2 other Whispering Stones up here, and this is likely the best Whispering Stone ability you can get, granted for a slightly higher cost though, I rank this one at an S tier. To its left, we have the one-off Rite of Forbidden Knowledge. Instantly gain 500 knowledge at the cost of 250 Imperium, and the opportunity cost of whatever we may be giving up to take this instead. I don't think that's good enough. I mean, 500 knowledge, like absolutely. And I am inclined to pick this if I'm researching a particularly expensive spell. Maybe I'm 1 away from the next research cycle. I'm trying to sort of boost up and sort of, fastly, not cheat, but sneak my way into a higher tome. This can provide value. But at a pure numerical analysis, 250 Imperium equals 2 knowledge. That means that for every 1 Imperium, I'm getting 2 knowledge. If we think back to something like Stolen Power, which of course doesn't just instantly happen, but the trade-off here is way better. It's 1-for-1 with knowledge, and we're getting a 1-for-1 with mana. It's almost like, 3, potentially 4 times the value of what Rite of Forbidden Knowledge is applying. I think it's a fairly expensive unlock. 500 knowledge could, at this point in the game, though, to be fair, be, potentially 3 turns worth of knowledge for you. I just don't think, for the price, you really quite get enough knowledge out of this. We could get 2,000 gold. Build libraries and build it up forever. However, I do have to factor in the one-time benefit. Getting 500 knowledge now is more useful than getting 10 knowledge a turn for the next 50 turns. And that matters. And making sure I actually have the right ones in the right spot for the tier list. Shout out to you if you notice that I put the wrong one in the wrong place. I think that this deserves an A tier. Despite my criticisms of it potentially not being great bang for your buck, knowledge is power. And having 500 surge in is a lot more useful than, as I say, having a little bit trickle in over time. For that reason, I do think it's an A tier pick. Next, we have Exalted by Shadows. Heroes gain experience 100% faster. Heroes are the most useful units to gain experience as well. Of course, we really like to level up our heroes because the abilities that they get from ranking up are so powerful. The support effects, the army-wide effects, they're all very good. And 100% extra experience gain is brilliant. They will turn the generals and the best units in your armies into even better ones. More healing abilities, more power. I think this is great. Of course, it relies on you actually going out and getting experience in order to get any value out of this. So more defensive players or playing more defensive strategies will find you less likely to get value here. You do need to be out and fighting in most cases to get value for money. Of course, there are other ways to tick up experience for units in army, for example, thanks to hero abilities. But by and large, fighting is your way to get value here. And for that reason, I will deduct a little bit off of its ranking. I think Exalted Shadows, though, is really good at what it does. It deserves an above-average power ranking, and I think it sits firmly in the A-tier rank. Potentially, some builds would rank it at S-tier, though. There is, of course, potential, if you've got lots of heroes, you're doing a lot of conquest to get real value. Next up, we have Shadow Domain. Your units gain universal camouflage inside of your own territory. 350 Imperium, and of course, quite a focus down the Shadow pathway. We'll be able to hide. Useful. Universal camouflage, so it doesn't matter where we're standing. We are hidden, able to strike the enemy down, potentially cut off troops that are marching into our land, or maybe launch a sneak attack, though it's only in our own domain, and they may not have vision over that anyway. So there is perhaps limited use for this. It isn't providing direct yield or growth to the Empire, So it doesn't necessarily help us scale up into more unlocks and new things. And I don't especially rate universal camouflage particularly highly inside of our own domain. I give this one a C tier ranking. Yes, it does provide some use case, and yes, there will be a few builds that might want to rank it much higher. But I think for its cost, what it does, what it delivers, it just isn't quite there and does still deserve a below average ranking at C tier. Alternatively, to its left, we could take the one-off effect right of the Exalted. All of your heroes gain +1 rank. And of course, in doing so, they gain an extra ability. Every 5 levels, they get a very powerful one, but even if it's not one of those, it may be a healing ability, it may be extra rank for units in the army, extra experience for troops, could be just pure attack damage. Whatever it is, all of our heroes will get +1. At this point, we may have 4 heroes in active service, potentially, with 4 cities online. And the 1 rank, 1 promotion is good. It's not often that we see rank of heroes relating to Imperium. So I find it difficult to value how much those ranks are actually worth. As a one-off thing, of course, it is a little bit temperamental. You know, you want to make sure your heroes are alive and that you've actually recruited them in time and that kind of thing. But I don't think that holds it back too much from being a pretty good benefit. Though I feel in some ways it's the kind of benefit that you choose when there isn't something better. Maybe you overlook it because you're grabbing the 2 or 3 other things you need for your synergy, for your strategy, and then you kind of come back to it when you've got the Imperium free. And for that reason, personally, I don't think it quite provides enough value to be ranked incredibly highly. For me, this deserves a B tier. It's a one-off effect, somewhat expensive. The benefit that it gives you is really good though, of course. Ranking up our heroes is great. And if I don't have to send them into combat to do it and risk their lives, maybe that's even better. It will depend a little bit on how many cities I have, therefore how many heroes I have, whether they're in active service and whether I intend to fight with them soon. But I think the benefit it provides makes it worthy of a solid B tier ranking. And penultimately, we have Dark Vigor. Your armies regenerate 10 hit points per turn in hostile domain. This is actually the only real thing on the tree that lets us regenerate domain inside of enemy territory just because we can. There are other ways to do it that we've talked about throughout the tier list, of course, including both one-off effects like the one in Order, as well as other more terrain-specific ways to heal, like saving up our movement points. This one, though, is just a flat benefit. You can heal while you're standing around the enemy, while you're pillaging, while you're gearing up for your siege, in between fights. It's incredibly strong, very, very strong indeed. It's a very unique ability as well. And just the fact that you can heal in enemy territory, it's very useful. And it could very well save the lives of your troops as well, saving much gold and draft and heartache moving forward. Dark Vigor for me is an S tier pick, purely because you can heal in enemy territory. All of the other strategies and things that we've discussed are irrelevant to that. That is just a stellar, unique ability. And last, and probably not least, Spying Shadows. At the very end, the most expensive thing in the Shadow Tree, you get this. It will immediately reveal the world map. So anywhere that you have somehow failed to explore by now, toward the end of the tree, later in the game, you should have explored quite a bit, but it'll all be revealed. Your throne city also gains infinite sensing range. It's kind of like you've got a little satellite in the sky, really, isn't it? This is the Civ 5 satellites, or the Civ 6 satellite technology, in that now we can sense everywhere from our throne city and the world is revealed. Armies within our sensing range, which is of course infinite, reveal their numbers and their allegiance. So this is really intelligence. Spying Shadows. You've got people everywhere. You've got eyes everywhere. The world is revealed. Your sensing range is infinite. And you'll get a lot of intelligence around where enemy armies are and what they're doing. You can of course use this alongside camouflage in your domain to have ultimate kind of tactical control over the map. You know where your units are and no one can see them hiding in your domain. And you know where all of theirs are how many they are, and where they're moving. A very powerful effect. As a side note, could tank your computer a little bit. Take care in picking this one up. I won't strictly deduct any points for that, of course, but just sort of point that out. Otherwise, though, I think it's a really powerful effect. It should be for its price, though. Very expensive, requires a lot of specialization, and arguably doesn't actually specialize with a lot else that we've done here, except for the aforementioned example. I think Spying Shadows does a great job at providing a really unique and really powerful effect. Having all of that intelligence is incredibly useful. Of course, it comes at a high price. For me, I think it deserves an A tier ranking. Not quite at the S tier, but it does do a great job at removing the no surprises policy. And for me, that's essentially what it delivers. No surprises. If I am monitoring the map and I want to figure out where armies are and how many they have, I can probably do so. And that for me gives it an A. And now, apologies everybody, a couple of technical difficulties. I'm going to have to go back through and backfill two that I missed. Reaching back into order at 150 Imperium, we have this one, which instantly gains plus 20 allegiance with all free cities at a cost of 150. This is a great way to get a boost ahead of the rest, because of course that initial competition for vassalization and for getting their allegiance does kind of depend on who gets there first, right? You could choose to spend Imperium to build allegiance, and as far as the trade-off goes here, for spending 150 to get plus 20 with all free cities, I'm hoping by this point you're potentially picking it up with at least 3 or 4. This is a really great bang for buck way to pick up allegiance somewhat early with the price of Imperium. I think it's very good. Of course, it does rely on that strategy, but you've leaned into the free city strategy anyway. For me, this is an A tier. It's a one-off effect, potentially a very powerful one, so long as you've discovered free cities, of course, when you've unlocked it. And if it's unlocked too late in the piece, it tends to basically not really have much of an impact. So I find there is a sweet spot for delivery in this one, but when it's delivered, it's very sweet. And last but not least, this time for real, Rite of the Crypt Blade. This is an extra blade that you can equip to your heroes in one of their offhand item slots. It's a fairly decent hero item, absolutely. It's equipable more readily, I would argue, than the breastplate that we could have unlocked in Materium. Easier to equip because there are many more slots to place this in. And across multiple heroes, of course, that just scales up infinitely. So instead of having 3 slots for 3, you have basically 9 slots for 3. Its effect is decent enough, and at the cost of 150 Imperium, while you may have better things to do at this early stage, like, for example, founding cities, or choosing one of the many other more powerful effects that will actually help to develop an empire, I do think that this blade is marginally better than the chest plate because it's easier to equip, though you could also equally argue that it's worse because it does less. I'm not a huge fan of spending Imperium on one-off abilities like this that just present us with one thing that is useful in a moment in time, providing we don't have the slot filled. However, as I mentioned, the slot is slightly easier to fill. Rite of the Crypt Blade for me ranks around a B or C tier ranking. I'm going to give it a C tier just because I think equipping this one item to one hero doesn't necessarily have a huge impact over the course of the game. If we're out there being fabled hunters or wondrous architects or one of the many builds that leans into wonders, or even just any playthrough, you'll likely be able to pick up different and better weapons. That, of course, alongside the many quests that inhabit the world. I'm not sure that this is the best use of 150 Imperium, and for that reason it ranks just in the C tier. And that, my friends, concludes the gargantuan effort that went into creating this development tree tier list. One of the most interesting parts of the game, and I think broadly, actually, there's a lot of decent picks here. You know, some of the distance between some of these things isn't that great, and generally, I tend to have stacked the tree pretty high in the high-powered zone, and not all that much down the bottom. Let me know what you think below. What did I royally screw up? Which one of your favorite development tree unlocks did I overlook or not evaluate properly? Let me know. Your feedback genuinely, though, honestly does go into shaping future videos. And to the people who give, really considered feedback, I can tell the difference between people who have listened to the video versus those who haven't. For example, if you're listening to this, you're one of the ones who have. So I'm not actually at risk of offending anybody. Either way, everybody, hey, thanks so much for tuning in. This may be the last Age of Wonders tier list for a while. I got a couple of other ideas. I'm not sure if they'll be interesting or not, though. We'll see how the game changes moving forward if we need to reevaluate this moving forward. I'd say looking at the expansion pass, we probably will. Good luck out there, and I'll see you next time.